The headlines on this story of the NHS are horrendous. They are awful. The NHS is on its knees, and slightly unusually, the so-called left-wing press and the right-wing press are in agreement on this. Even the BBC are wading in. Patients dying in hospital corridor is their headline. The Royal College of Nursing has been asking its members what the state of play is at the coalface of our hospitals, and it's not a pretty picture. You know, for years we've had managers or politicians who have attempted to tell us what's happening in the NHS, and they've got an impressive spreadsheet with some data on it, and somebody's monkeyed with the figures, and they've come out with the headline, it ain't quite as bad as some people say. There's a lot of good work going on, and we're still making progress, etc. And each time we're faced with the thumping and irredeemable reality that the NHS is, frankly, knackered. It's not a good picture when you have patients dying on trolleys in corridors and staff not even having the time to notice that a patient has died in a corridor. You know you're in trouble. Wes Streeting says that he's onto it and the situation is unacceptable. Right, Wes? Yeah, it's unacceptable, mate. He lays the blame at the previous government. Of course he does, and I don't dispute the previous government were awful on this as well. But he now carries the can for this. The General Secretary of the Royal College of Nursing, however, has said, this is Professor Nicola Ranger, who said this should be a wake-up call for the Labour government, and the experiences of nursing staff could not be more troubling. And by the way, they asked 5,000 people, 5,000 nursing staff on this list, what the state of play was and what it looked like from their perspective in their hospitals. And some of the stuff that came back is horrendous. People having cardiac arrests in corridors or cubicles which are blocked by patients on trolleys, delaying life-saving CPR. I mean, they can't get through because there's no space to put people. Others dying on trolleys and chairs in waiting rooms. One nurse saying the NHS was no better than the developing world. Is this your experience of the NHS? Women miscarrying in side rooms, which nurses said was not only distressing for the patients but made it difficult to monitor for deterioration. An incontinent frail patient with dementia having to change next to a vending machine in a corridor. Cases where 20 to 30 patients have been left in corridors under the care of one nurse. I mean, seriously, elderly patients left to sit on chairs for days, spending hours in bed on corridors in soiled clothing. It's the 21st century. So almost every show we've done in the last few months kind of begins with this qualified, incredulous remark that it's the 21st century. I mean, we're also a quarter of a way through the 21st century. This kind of stuff should not be happening. This kind of stuff is entirely predictable. Yes, of course, we have a growing population and we have a big problem. And the big problem, you could argue, started at various points going back in history. Was it when we started cutting beds? You know, in 1998, there were 299,000 hospital beds. Today, 140,000. We have literally more than halved the amount of beds. But even if you lobbed all those beds back into the system, having the frontline staff, the clinicians, the doctors, the nurses, the consultants, and everybody in between that deals every day, you know, just with one or two patients requires teams of people down the line. It ain't going to happen. So Wes Streeting tomorrow could lob in 100,000 beds. He could buy every machine that goes ping and install them into every single hospital, and it still wouldn't solve the problem. As far as I can see, this ultimately comes down to a lack of staff, right? Is that your experience of the NHS? 0344 499 1000. I'd like to speak with you if you work in this field. If you are a GP, a nurse, a paramedic, if you work in the administration department at a hospital, what the hell is going wrong? No, I know if you ask 5,000 people who work at a place, you know, everyone's got an answer. But when it comes to something as serious as our healthcare, I don't dispute for 1 second that those answers come with a great deal of experience and qualification. This is 5,000 nursing staff. This is what they are seeing on a daily basis. Now, I know everyone has a good story about the NHS, and if you nip down to A&E tomorrow at a place that's not particularly city-centred, nipped in, you might wait a couple of hours, they'd sort out your sprained ankle or they'd diagnose something else, you'd go into the room to see the consultant, everything would, things do still happen. But that, by the way, is not the answer. It's not, well, OK, well, everything's fine with the NHS, because, look, me Uncle Bill went in there and they were fantastic. They got everything sorted and they removed his gallbladder in record time. Life was brilliant for Bill. Yes, everyone can tell the anecdotal story, but at the coalface, it's a problem. This is a disaster. It's an emergency. Didn't somebody call it a war zone, Ruth? We need to treat it like a war zone. I think we do. 0344 499 1000. I'm bound to throw in the obvious question, what are your experiences when it comes to this? And I'm talking about things you get to see when you're in a hospital, whether you're in A&E, whether you're a patient, whether you have somebody who's elderly and stuck in A&E because they can't move them anywhere else. Your own experiences of this. But the wider question is, how do we resurrect the thing? What is the answer? And people go, okay, we need more private stuff. Yeah, maybe, but the private sector is also going to struggle as well, because you need the clinical staff, whatever plan you come up with, to make things happen. Growing population, fewer beds. I mean, do the maths, kids.